Hello and welcome to the BYU Library Family History webinar. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Olivia Tueller and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is on April 6th with Byron Holdeman. He will be giving a presentation entitled The Library of Congress, a Treasure for Genealogy. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Sara Cochran, who will be giving a presentation on Who Needed It Anyway? Getting Around the Missing 1890 Census. Before we begin, here is a little bit about Sara. Sara is a full-time professional genealogist with over 28 years of research experience. Her research has taken her into nearly every state in the USA, and Ireland, Italy, Austria, and Britain. She especially enjoys breaking down brick walls for her clients, discovering the stories of Black sheep ancestors, and helping individuals preserve their photographic legacy. Sara holds a Boston University Genealogical Research Certificate, a bachelor's degree in library science, and is an alumnus of the ProGen Study Group. She is a member of multiple lineage societies, the Association of Professional Genealogists, and the Genealogical Speakers Guild. She also volunteers at the National Archives Riverside office. You can find her online at theskeletonwhisperer.com. And if Sara is ready, we can go ahead and turn the time over to her.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you all for joining BYU and myself this evening, wherever you are. And we're going to kind of jump right in and try to answer this question of who needed it anyway. All right, now, we've all been here, right? We're sitting in our computer, we're researching merrily right along on our family tree, and we're making really great progress, and then we hit a brick wall. Not just any old average brick wall. No. The brick wall known as the 1890 census. And it's deflating and kind of discouraging because, if you're working from the current time backwards, the next census isn't until 1880. And if you're coming forward, it's 1900. So you got this 20-year gap in the records. And that causes all manner of problems for our work. So we're going to talk about the census and how to get around this brick wall. So I'm going to be mean to you a little bit, and we're going to look at what the original census contained and what happened to it, because it's a little more complicated than the standard response if it burned in a fire. Once we get through the painful part of acknowledging what we've lost, we're going to talk about what's left. There are some fragments left, and we'll look at those, and then we are going to talk about how to research without the 1890. And one of the best parts about all of the record sets and tips I'm going to give you in this next hour is that we can apply these wherever we're missing a census in United States research. So maybe you've got the family in 1850 and you've got them in 1870, and in 1860 they were hiding under the bed and refused to talk the enumerator. You can use these same techniques to fill in that 20-year gap as well. So your handout includes links to 3 articles written by Kelly Blake for the National Archive Prologue publication. It goes into more detail. I'm going to kind of give you the summation of those articles, and it's a quick read. You might not like me at the end of this, but I'm just the messenger. So unlike previous census records, enumerations where we get 3 copies of the census made, one held at the county level, one at the state, and one at the federal level, there was only 1 copy made of the 1890 census. So this was different. And this singular copy was sent to the federal government. It was stored in the basement or in the building of the Department of the Interior. And in March of 1896, there was a fire in that building, and it badly damaged the following special schedules: mortality, crime, pauperism, and benevolence, special classes, and portions of the transportations and insurance schedules. The damaged records were subsequently destroyed by the Department of the Interior. So if you're thinking, I've never even heard of those, well, now you know why. They didn't make it out of the 1800s, unfortunately. But in the aftermath of the fire, no damage at all was found to the general population schedules. And in 1903, a census clerk noted that they were in pretty good shape. Now, between 1903 and 1921, there's a lot of lobbying going on. There's a lot of pressure being put on the federal government by the Secretary of Commerce and other federal agencies, as well as private organizations, including the Daughters of the American Revolution, which has, they aim for historic preservation. But the pressure was to create a national archive, somewhere where we could house the records that told the story of America, our Constitution, our census records, military records, things like this, because we didn't have an archive at this point in time. And this becomes important to the story. In 1921, the 1890 records were moved from the Department of the Interior over to the Commerce Building basement. Please don't keep your records in a basement if you can help it. Had you visited, though, the Department of Commerce on the 10th of January, 1921, you would have seen, you could have gone down in the basement and seen the stacks of 1890 schedules on closely placed pine shelves. There was a vault in the basement that was fireproof, watertight, supposedly. The vault wasn't big enough to hold everything, so the 1890 was not in the vault. At 5 o'clock on that day, smoke is seen coming from the file room down in the basement. So they called for the fire department and they begin their work. And between 5:30 and 9:45 or so, they pour 20 streams of water into the basement. About 9:45, they say, okay, we're pretty sure it's out now, but they keep going until 10:30 just to be on the safe side. The cause of the fire was never determined. But the building had been saved, the long day was finally over, and everyone went home. And the next day, staff returned to this. This is the 1890s, this is part of the basement. Some of that water was ankle deep. So they were wading through the water that had been used to put out the fire. It is at this point that the vault was discovered not to be as fireproof and waterproof as it was supposed to have been. So some of the records in the vault were actually damaged. So, but this is 1890, and I'm pretty sure that my family, the one I'm looking for, would, my toughest nut to crack, as it were, is on that second shelf from the bottom 3 over. Right. Now, Census Director Sam Rogers reports the damage to the 1890 census. About 25% total destruction. And from the picture we can see, especially the stuff on the bottom, yeah, that's gone. About half of the records were damaged by water, smoke, and fire. So we're going to pause there for just a second. That means that at least 25% of the 1890 census was left perfectly intact and totally undamaged from this event. And half of it was, it was damaged, but it had survived. There were nearly 63 million people enumerated on these schedules. If we average 5 people per page, that's like 12.5 million pages, 75% of which survived the 1921 fire in some form or other. Why do we only have 1,233 pages left? Well, according to the Blake article in December 1932, in accordance with federal record procedures at the time, it's 1932, the chief clerk of the Bureau of Census sent the Librarian of Congress a list of papers no longer necessary for current business and scheduled for destruction. He asked that the librarian to report back to him any documents that should be retained for their historical interest. So this is kind of a last call. What do we want to keep? Item 22 on this list is Schedules Population 1890 Original. Well, the Librarian of Congress did not say, hey, we want to hang on to those. And so the list went forward with this item on it, and Congress authorized the destruction of everything on the list on February 21st, 1933. A small scribbled note found in a Census Bureau file states that the remaining schedules were destroyed by the Department of Commerce in 1934. To add insult to injury, now remember, we don't have an archive through all of this. There's no national archive. To add insult to injury, the cornerstone of the National Archive, now known as Archives 1 in Washington, D.C., was laid by the president on the 20th of February, 1933. Yet the day before, Congress authorized the destruction of what remained of the 1890 census. I told you weren't going to like it. I'm very sorry. I hope you all had your hankies out. And don't start a letter writing campaign to your Congress people. They weren't even alive, for most of them, for this whole shenanigan event, so it's not their fault. But now we know kind of the rest of the story. Some of it burned in fires. Most of it was destroyed, frankly, by the government. So there you have it. So let's take a look at what the records contained, because we do have some fragments. So this is one of the surviving fragments of the 1890 census. As we can see just from this much, it's very different from the censuses that we're used to looking at here in the United States. We're going to take a closer look. So the 1890 census enumerated one household at a time. This was totally new. This is the first time we had really done this in the United States. All the others are neighborhood censuses. The questions are down the left-hand column, and then each household member fills in their column, going from the head of household to number 1 off to the right. And there were 10, there was space for 10 people per page. So if you had a smaller household, you used a whole page and you had lots of blanks. We get all the basic questions. We get their name, their surname, if they were a veteran or the widow of a veteran, that was a little bit different. The relationship to the head of household, the race, the sex, the age, the marital status. If they had been married within the previous year, that was notated. Very helpful for those states that weren't recording marriage records yet. If they were a woman, how many children they had and how many of those were still alive. Now that's the question we see again in 1900 and 1910. We get some more. They were also asked about their own place of birth, the birthplace of their parents, if they were an immigrant, how long they had been in the United States, and if they were naturalized. If they were not yet naturalized, had they started that process? We get the profession, and we get the period of unemployment. So had they been out of work in the previous year? That's a lot, but wait, there's more. The enumerators also recorded if the individual had been at school in the previous year, if they could read and write, if they could speak English. If not, then we get the language that they did speak. The census also captured a little bit of medical information. So whether they were suffering from an acute or chronic disease, or, and this is the language of the record, if they were, quote, defective. So if they were blind or deaf or something along those lines, that's their terminology, not mine. If they were a prisoner, convict, homeless child, or pauper, remember I had those pauperism and benevolent schedules, where this is picking up. And if they appeared on a supplemental schedule, we got a cross-reference to the page number. And I don't know about you, but I really want 1890 back. Right? I mean, look at all that amazing information that some of which we don't see on any other census record. Well, now I do have some good information for some of you. There are some fragments, 1,233 pages or parts thereof, survive. And if you are related to one of those 6,160 individuals on those records, you hit the jackpot is what you've done. There's a detailed list of what survives in your handout. In some cases, it's literally one street. But if you have folk from any of these locations, you definitely want to take a closer look at the 1890 census fragments. And keeping in mind that, if it's the first half of the page that was salvaged, then you want to look for that head of household. And if it was the second half, you want to look for the other people in the household. So, if you've got a person in that spot, it's not a lot of pages. It's easy to look through them, each one, and see if you got anything interesting. Now, for the rest of us, we are fortunate in that a decent portion of the 1890 veteran schedule survived. There's a list in your handout of the locations. It's thankfully a lot longer than the population schedule. So just as a general guideline, it's the second half of the alphabet, starting with Kentucky. Not Kansas, darn it, but well, you'll see why that in a minute. But Kentucky to Wyoming plus Washington, D.C. All right, so we get a lot of great information in this record. The enumerator's instructions were to record the information for those who had served in the Army, Navy, or Marine Corps of the United States in the War of the Rebellion, and that's from the quote from the instructions. This translates simply to Union veterans. So the soldiers at all of the Confederacy in 1890 were simply not recognized as United States soldiers. But, and I love it when this happens, not all of the enumerators followed their directions perfectly, or they were interviewing somebody and they got partway through filling out the form and they're like, oh, wait, you were Confederate, we're not supposed to write you down. So sometimes they're in there. So don't skip the veteran schedule if you have Confederate ancestors or think you might have Confederate ancestors, if they're living in the state that survives, go check. They might be on there anyway. And of course, we do have veterans who served on both sides, and we have widows in the records. And if the widow, maybe she started off married to a Confederate soldier and she was widowed and then she married a Union guy, look for her in these records as well. Fortunately, with the widows, we also get the name of the soldier that she belongs to. In this case, we have Olive Norcross, the widow of Daniel Moss. So this actually gives us a lot of information. We get information about Moss's service. But in addition to the fact that Daniel Moss's wife was Olive, her last name is Norcross in 1890. So this is a big clue that she has remarried. So if you're struggling to find her, maybe this is her. So taking a closer look at the veteran schedule, we can see that it's different. You've got the first half of the record is on the first half of the page, and then it follows down. But you get the name of the surviving soldier, sailor, marine, and their widow. If the soldier had enlisted under an alias, the enumerator was supposed to list both names. We get rank, company, regiment, and vessel. We get the date of enlistment and discharge and total length of service. Some men, enlisted, got out, enlisted again, got out, enlisted again. There should be an entry for each of those separate enlistments. So they're supposed to get all of it in there. We get the post office address, so we kind of know where they're living. We get any disability that they may have incurred, and any remarks, which according to the instructions were intended to be used to cover points not included in the foregoing inquiries necessary to complete a person's term of service. So taking a closer look at this entry, we have James Ruffle, who was a private, and all of the information, his dates of enlistment and things, they're dashed out. Those dates aren't there, and they should be. But when we drop down to the bottom and we look at the rest of his entry, we see in remarks that he has lost his discharge papers. So that explains why there's some missing information. Okay. But once we're finally out of 1890 actual census records, now what do we do? Well, we're going to go back to that first rule of genealogy. We're going to start with what we know. And then we're going to pull every last clue and nugget and detail out of the records we know are right to lead us to other records. We're going to use the family of William A. Knapp as kind of an example throughout the rest of the presentation. This is his family in 1900, and they live in Woods County, Oklahoma, so I've transcribed the most important bits. William was born June of 1837. He's been married 35 years in New York, and so is his parents, and he's a blacksmith. His wife Elizabeth was born in June of 45 and has also been married for 35 years. She was born in Pennsylvania, her parents in Connecticut and Rhode Island. So we've got some really big clues that we can work with right off the bat, just from this little information. First of all, William is the right age to have served in the Civil War. And he claims he was born in New York. So if he did serve, he was probably part of the Union military force. They each state they've been married 35 years, so that's probably to each other. So I want to look for a marriage record, starting with New York and Pennsylvania, where these two individuals were born around 1865. Now, Elizabeth also states that she is the mother of 12 children, 11 of whom are still alive. But in 1900, we only have 3 in the house: Sylvia, Samuel, and Charles. Now, the birthplaces of these children are important clues. All right, it shows us that William, a blacksmith, and his family are moving around a lot. And it gives us the start of a timeline and a migration route for this family. And we're going to use all of these details to help us discover the identities of Elizabeth's other 9 children. All right, so let's create a rough plan with the information that we've gathered just from this one census to help us go backwards. So we start with our research question. We want to know who are Elizabeth's children. So we're going to create a plan. A marriage record won't directly answer the question about who her children are, but looking for it will help us confirm the date and, most importantly, the place of marriage, because this family is moving around a lot. We want to look for William in the 1890 veteran schedule. Since there's he's the right age and he served in New York, he might be in there. And a family as migratory as this one living in Kansas in 1887 and Oklahoma by 1900, and I don't know where they are in 1890, they're moving, we want to check for both of those states, if we can. We also want to look for pension file or a widow's pension file if Elizabeth outlived him, or if he was injured in some way, or they got 12 kids, he might have asked for a pension just to help feed the family, right? So we want to look for pension records. Now, unfortunately, and that pension, especially if either way, there may be a list of children, hey, I cut 12 kids and these are who they are. Now, unfortunately, I did check the 1890 veteran schedule, and I'm pretty sure he was still living in Kansas, so no dice there, and it's not in Oklahoma, and he had a pension and it's missing. So what else can I do? Well, I'm gonna look for the 1880 census. This will help me narrow William's family to a few places in time, and hopefully give us some more children from this household. We want to check Nebraska because we're living there close to 1880. But we also can't rule out Pennsylvania and New York just yet either. And in fact, I find the family in Nebraska in 1880, which fits with Sylvia being born there in 1883. They're in Saunders County. William, 41, and Elizabeth, 34, born in New York and Pennsylvania, have the following children in their household. We have Mary, 14, Francis, Silas, Ernest, London, and Daisy. And these are all new children. There's no overlap in this bunch versus the bunch in 1900. So when we combine these two census records, we see that we've got 9 down, got 9 of her 12 children. We're just missing 3. So we're making pretty good progress just there. Now, this technique, when we take 2 consecutive censuses, whether there's a gap in between or not, and we compare them, it's called a track and trace. But we want to do more than just compare the enumeration data of a single family in these types of records. We want to look at the rest of the page for clues. When we do this specifically with the 1900 census, we're looking for adults between the ages of 17 and 21. These individuals were born either in the census year or shortly after the 1880 census year. They're not living with their parents anymore. They're in their own household. And we want to research them, especially the women who have now moved out and taken their husband's name. We want to research those girls. To see if that's one of our missing children. Keep in mind that children do not always leave the house in birth order. A 23-year-old son might still be living with his parents helping out on the farm, while his 19-year-old sister is married and living down the street. Okay, often when we see a big gap in we see a list of children and there's a gap in ages between 2 of them, we think, oh, that's very sad, someone has passed away. And that can be the case, especially if they're younger children. But when you start getting those kids into that adulthood range, you want to consider the fact that they're just not leaving in order. So, taking another look at the 1900 census we found in Oklahoma for William and his family, we're going to look at the rest of the page. And we're going to see that living right next door to our William is a William F. Knapp. He's 31. He's head of the house. He's born in Pennsylvania. Now, we saw a male Francis in 1880. In William's household, we have Frank Hoskins, a brother-in-law, and a sister, Lucy, who is 18. Frank and Lucy have been married for 2 years, married in 1898. So some of you probably already working this one out. Lucy might be one of those missing 3 children. And in fact, when we go check out the Oklahoma marriage record collection, we see that 17-year-old Adella Knapp, daughter of W.A. Knapp, married Henry Hoskins in 1898. Now, I did not find this because I was looking for Adella. And by the way, it's Lucy Adella. This family liked to, they gave all their kids middle names and then they bounced back and forth and couldn't decide which one they used. I don't know. At the time, I didn't have Lucy Adella on my radar. I didn't really know about her yet when I found this. And the reason I found this, I was actually looking for Lucy Adella's little brother Samuel and his marriage record. So one of the tips is to search in a record collection with the first and last name of the father and the first name only of the mother, and leave the information about the target person out of the equation. This helps me locate vital record, especially vital records, but other records as well, for children born after 1880 who have already left the house by 1900, whether they've gotten married or if they have passed away. So especially with those post-1880 births, they disappear on us by 1800, 1900. We don't know who they are or that they even existed, and this can help us find them. It can also help us find the kids who wandered off to go see the world and didn't keep in contact with the family. And it's especially valuable for any family that has started to lose its census, lost a census, right? So, that first scenario, you have them in 50, you have them in 70, they hid from the enumerator in 60. This is one way to find those folks in the middle. Whoops. Now, the NAPs move around a lot. It's easy to see that I've got to look in lots of different places. I can't just look in New York. I got to look all over the place for them. But what about your family that stayed in a single state and moved around? Have you ever wondered how your farmers kept picking up their 160 acres and moving counties every 10 years? They didn't. That took me a little while. As a baby genealogist, I'm like, how did they do that? They didn't. The borders moved, not the farm. But it makes it look like our family moved. We have to keep in mind that county borders are subject to change. And knowing what county our ancestors were living in at the time that they lived there is going to make a really big difference as to whether or not we're successful in finding the records. Because, the reality is that most records remain with the agency that created them, even if the borders changed. They didn't go to the new county and say, hey, we pulled out all the marriage records that took place in the section of our area that is now part of your county. Happy housewarming. They didn't do that. Right? They kept the records. So how do we figure out what the boundaries of an area were when our ancestors were living there? I do recommend, if you're like me and you like paper and books, I recommend the map guide to the U.S. federal censuses as an addition to your genealogical library. It was published in 1987. And it overlays historical boundaries with the modern boundaries of 1987. So it's a little bit out of date, but the more modern ones, you can get some really good maps as well. And you can compare the historical boundaries between census years, which is really, really handy if you've got an area where the borders are moving around a lot. So this is South Carolina. As we can see, so we've got 1880 on the left there. The white lines are the modern 1987 boundaries, and the black lines are the contemporary, so the 1880 and 1900 boundaries. And as you can see, we've got some major changes going on in this 20-year span. So let us say that your family lives on a plot of land in Abbeville County in 1880, and it's this little section, this northeast corner of Abbeville County. So you go to the 1900 census and you're looking at Abbeville County for your people. You're not going to find them, because by 1900, that little section of Abbeville County had split off and become part of Greenwood County, South Carolina. So you can see what I mean. Sometimes you got to double check, did the boundary change? Now, fortunately for us, the 1890 census is not the only set of records that was created between 1880 and 1900. We got tons of stuff. We got all kinds of records created in this time frame by all sorts of people. And some of them are going to relate to your family. So let's take a look at a few examples. County histories. Love a good county history. The federal government encouraged, did not require, but encouraged each county in the country to put together a history for a 100th birthday in 1876. A lot of counties did this. Now, the goal was to publish for the centennial, but there were people publishing well into the 1890s, the early 1900s. There's still some of these being published. And it's also not uncommon to see small counties teaming up to do like a regional history. Okay? They're otherwise known as brag books because they do brag about the accomplishments of the county itself, which gives you great historical context about your family and what they were getting themselves into when they moved west. But individual residents could write up their history and have it included in the book for a fee, usually. So you're more likely to find prominent citizens or the more moderately successful people biographied in these books, but don't assume that your poor farmer got missed. They might have been mentioned by somebody else. They could have scrounged up, could have been a family thing. Everybody in the family chipped in and they wrote one biography and tried to get as many people in there as they could. Now, keep in mind that these really are, author narratives, they're autobiographies. So take them with a grain of salt. We use them as clues and leads because, memories fade, details shift in the, family history, the family game of telephone. And there's always the temptation to, you're writing a book for posterity. Let's just leave it there. A really good resource to figure out if you have a county history available for your area is the Bibliography of American County Histories, compiled by Philby. It's not, he missed a few, but it's a very good start. It's actually quite a long book, and he got, I would say probably 90% or better of them, if not more. So it's great reference. From there, you can check websites such as Google Books, the Internet Archive, and HathiTrust for a digitized copy of the books. Keeping in mind that these books, anything before I think it's 1926 is the current copyrighted, these older ones are in the public domain, and they are free for these websites to legally digitize and put available for free. So there's some really great stuff out there for free. We're going to take a look at the kind of information we might find in one of these books. Now, I've typed out the salient points, but this is from the Biographical and Historical Memoirs of Story County, Iowa, published in 1890. It's the biography of S.W. Dakins, deceased, who was born in Canada in 1840. He moves to Iowa after 1870, where he buys 440 acres. Then he goes back up to Illinois for a little bit and marries to Kate Cahill, who's also born in Canada. Sadly, Kate passes away in 1881, and S.W. marries again a couple of years later. Sadly, even more sadly, S.W. passes away on August of 1889. And he would have been in the mortality schedule for 1890, but of course that record does not survive to the present day. So we've got lots of great information about SW and his life, and between 1880 and 1900, because we've got that, Kate's death, the remarriage, and then SW's death itself. And we can fact check this kind of thing. We can look in newspapers for obituaries, or Iowa's got some really early vital records in some counties, but we can look at the land records. We can look at all kinds of things to help us kind of check this out and see what we can verify. Shifting gears a bit, let's talk about some government records that would have been created in the time frame where we're dealing with. Many of the United States took their own censuses, usually on years ending in 5. There's a few that did it on years ending in 4. And these are great for filling in the gap. Now, in your handout is a reference to the State Census Records by Anne Lanehart, really good book. I do recommend it. We're going to take a look at states with censuses between 1880 and 1900. We are nowhere close to capturing all of the censuses that all of the states took. We're just looking at this 20-year period. Arizona gives us one in 1882. Colorado, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Rhode Island give us 1885. Florida, Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, New Jersey, South Dakota, and Wisconsin all get a gold star because they give us 1885 and 1895, which means we are very nicely covering that gap. New York gives us a census in 1892, and there's a Manhattan police census in 1890. So for those of you who got people in Manhattan, you actually do kind of get an 1890 census. If you have family from Oklahoma Territory's first 7 counties, you want to go check out the territorial census, which is indexed at the Oklahoma Historical Society website. Michigan gets 2 gold stars because they give us 1884, 1894, a veterans census of their own in 1888, and being in the second half of the alphabet, their 1890 veteran schedule survives as well. It makes me want to get a time machine, gather up all my family who lived here in this country, and plunk them into Michigan for that time period, but I can't do that. So we're all, and like I said, this is just a sampling of what's out there. So where can we find them? Well, Some are online at websites such as Ancestry and, of course, Family Search. And some state archives have started digitizing their own census records or indexing them at historical societies or even putting them on historical societies. The 1884 and 1894 census returns for Michigan are online, fully indexed and searchable at michiganology.org. Before we leave census records altogether, did you know that schools would take a census at the beginning of the year? Now, these are fun records if you can find them, but availability varies wildly and the information on them varies as well. So some might only list the actual registered student. Often I do see parents or guardians, but not always. You might get school-aged children, everybody, even if they're not going to be attending class on a regular basis. They might be on the list anyway. And some I have seen include non-school age children, the kids that are probably going to be in school within the next year or two. It was a way for the district to get an idea of how many kids they were going to have, in the coming years. All right, so where are you going to find these guys? Look to county and state archives first. Understand that a lot of them are not digitized, although Family Search does have an increasingly large collection of these types of records, including Oklahoma. And I'm itching to get get some time to go digging in those. If you are researching an individual who attended one of the schools run by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, you want to contact the National Archives Regional Office that holds the records for that state. These are not centralized records like military records are. Their individual various offices. So the records of the Phoenix, Arizona Indian School are held at the National Archives Riverside office here in Southern California. And there's some really cool stuff in those records too. I have to say I've worked with them and they're really interesting. To give you just a taste, this is an example of a 1913 school census from a teeny tiny district in Wyoming. Now, these are usually created annually. So even if you only get some of the records extant, so you're missing a few years here and there, you should still have some good success finding your family if you've got the right school district. In this record, we get the name of the child, their age, their sex. In this case, we get their nationality or where they were born. This community has a lot of immigrants and migrants. And you can see that you've got Nebraska and Wyoming and Colorado, and further down the page is Austria and Greece and all kinds of good stuff. The name of the parent or guardian and the parent's residence. These kids are all living out in the rural, Wyoming, of course, was a homestead state. So you're getting the section, township, and range. So you can kind of get out a plat map and figure out where they were. Besides being able to track the family and capture those kids who live their whole lives between two census records, this type of record is worth the effort because this is your person's first fan club, those friends, associates, and neighbors, term coined by Elizabeth Schoenmill. These are the kids that your person is going to school with, playing with after class, maybe studying with, maybe doing extracurricular activities, depending on the time and place. They might be going to church together. Their daddies might work at the same type of job. Their mamas might all shop at the same store in town. They might, and I followed this particular school district for decades because this is where my family is from. You might see them later getting married and having children of their own. So there really are some cool records if you can find them. Whether our ancestors got this formal education really is a matter of time and place, their parents' livelihood, and if the record survived is lots of different options. To give you a peek at the variety of information you can find in these records. So this is Wyoming. This is nice and neat. This one is from 1887 in Bingham County, Idaho. And it's kind of a name scramble. I'm still not exactly sure how this is organized, to be honest. I haven't spent a lot of time digging in it, but it's just a list. We also get this example from Whitman County, Washington in about 1888. We get the name of the parent and then just how many children they have, male versus female, in the school. So it's a little bit like those, early US Census records with kind of the tick marks. So they're still helpful because you have an idea of how many children are in the household and, if they're boys or girls, that can help you. But it really does vary wildly on this stuff. There's lots of yearly records in addition to school censuses. And of course, one of those, we're all getting ready to gear up to do our own, tax records. Gotta do those every year. In the earliest records, you want to look at the total number of people being taxed. And as this is changing, consider the possibility that some young man has either passed away or has left his parents' house to start his own home. We also want city directories. These are often published yearly, maybe 1 or 2 years apart. They're a great way to follow your ancestors' movements between census records, keeping in mind that these books are compiled 1 to 2 years before publication. So the information might be a smidgen outdated, but they're still very valuable. And many of them have either at the very beginning of the book or the very end of the book, a little list of last minute updates, things that they became aware of after it had already gone to print or it was too late to change the main book. And sometimes you get necrologies where you get the list of folks who have passed away. Voter registrations and rolls can be harder to find, but they do exist and they are worth the effort. There are some California voter registration records and ancestry. Now we got to keep in mind what the minimum age to vote was. For most of United States history, we're talking about landowners, men, over 21, or some combination of those 3 items. But land-owning widows could often vote in place of their husbands after their husband passed away, and there's still a vote basically tied to the land, and she could cast that vote. And while women did not receive the right to vote at a federal level, like for the president and for Congress people and things, until 1920, many states and counties allowed single and married women to vote before that date. So look at school board elections, look at local mayoral elections, even state governor elections, especially as you're moving west. Wyoming state constitution gave women the right to vote at a state level in all state elections in 1869, way before 1920. So look at the law. I got to channel your inner legal genealogist, our wonderful Judy Russell, and look at the law in the time and place before you say, oh, there won't be records for that because of XYZ, especially with voting. Land and estate records are a great way of tracking our family between census enumerations. Maybe I have not convinced you that the William Knapp of Nebraska in 1880 and the William Knapp of Oklahoma in 1900 is the same family, because there are no shared children. I mean, all of the children in 1880 have moved out apparently, and all of the kids in 1900 are new. So you can look at land records. Is William selling his land in Nebraska after 1880 and then buying land in Oklahoma before 1900? That can add to the evidence that it's the same family. Wills may reveal previously unknown children, especially the daughters who have gotten married. Guardians would be appointed for minors, anyone under the age of 21, who inherited either real estate or significant cash inheritance. And in the southern United States before emancipation, that included the personal property of enslaved persons. So they might need a guardian. Mom could, an unremarried widow could often serve as guardian to tend to the legal affairs of her child, but it wasn't automatic. And so you want to look at court records, and those are often in the probate court records. If you are looking for someone who died between 1880 and 1900 and you can't find a probate or a will, go look for the land. Sometimes that was all they had was the land, and so they sold the land, and that's all it was. Okay, so a land sale may be the result of either a move, I'm going to move my family that way, or basically in lieu of a will or probate. Keeping in mind, pay attention to who's inheriting. With land records, pay attention to who is signing off on that they can sell the land, because the husbands are going to be the ones named, or often, so that unknown male inheritor could be a son-in-law. And of course, that very last piece of land most of our ancestors owned, the final resting place. Check cemetery records. Look at family plots. Look at who is buried in the family plot that doesn't seem to fit. They might be an extended family member. If you've got somebody who's kind of seemingly buried all on their own and they're your person, see if the cemetery has records about who paid for the plot or who paid for the funeral. That may lead to previously unknown kin. Other court records can explain the disappearance of a person between 1880 and 1900. So don't be shy about checking for legal trouble. Arrest records, they might have gone to prison, or lawsuits, whether they are being sued or they are doing the suing. Now, there's lots and lots of court records that we could get into. I'm going to put that in part 2 of this course. But, he could have served on a jury, could have given testimony. There's all kinds of reasons your person is in the court, not because they're causing mischief. Naturalization is a good example. In this time period, this was handled by the county and district courts. Now, unfortunately, the records don't give us a lot of detail about the person we're looking for. This is just Patrick Ronan of Ireland. There's only one of those. I don't know why I'm complaining. Oh, I got to pick a better example. I'm teasing. There's a lot of Patrick Ronans of Ireland. But at least I know that one of them was in the Alameda County, Iowa, being naturalized in 1874. So I can use this as kind of a jumping off and look for other records about this man and see if he's mine or not. Now, when we have one spouse listed in 1880 and another listed in 1900, we kind of jump to this person has sadly passed away, and that is often the case. But especially if you can't find any other evidence that this person has passed away, consider that there may be a divorce in the mix. Check court records as well as newspapers for evidence of a divorce. Speaking of newspapers, they're your bestest friend ever. I love newspapers. They weren't created every 10 years like the census, or even annually like school records and taxes. Weekly, often daily. I love these. Now, in case you're thinking, no, my people aren't in the papers, I'm going to let you in on a fun little fact. Thanks to developments in the printing industry and rising literacy rates at this time, the penny press newspapers are doing booming business. The 1880 census recorded over 11,000 newspapers in circulation. I did the math for you. That is a ratio of one paper for every 4,400 people. There's better odds than you realize that your people are going to be in the newspaper, in the local newspaper, because let's face it, this was the Facebook of their day, and they didn't have the privacy controls that we have on our Facebook accounts. All right, so all kinds of gossipy little things in there, including birth notices, marriage announcements, licenses being issued, and notices of major anniversaries, 50th anniversary, 60th anniversaries, divorces. Somebody's filed for divorce, somebody's squabbling over the divorce, the final decree of the divorce. Biographies, somebody's about to turn 100, local paper is going to write that up, right? Big birthdays, and of course we get obituaries. We love a good obituary. We genealogists do, but so look for those, but it's way more than just that. Check the social column for notes about who is traveling where, to who is ill that week, to people putting wells on their land as home improvements, or even notes about families moving away, which can often help you figure out why they're not where they should be in the following census. So I can hear you thinking at me, this is awesome. Where do I find it? Okay. My first online stop when researching a family, especially in this time frame, or if I'm just not familiar with a specific county, is the Family Search Wiki. If you don't use the wiki yet, you've got homework and you are going to love this. So volunteers and staff have assembled miniature locality guides for places all over the globe, and it's totally free. You don't even have to be signed into your free Family Search account. It's free. So when you go to familysearch.org, you're going to go to that search box and you're going to click on the wiki. And you're going to come to a search screen that looks a bit like this, right? And you're going to put in a place or a topic. You can use a keyword. There's articles way more than just places. You could put in marriage in the United States, Chinese immigration, take it back. So for fun, I put in Clay County, South Dakota. And in the interest of time, we won't do a live demonstration. But this is kind of the intro page when you open up Clay County, South Dakota. You get a description of the county, you get information about the county courthouse, where, which office in the county holds certain types of records if it's known. Along the left-hand column, you get a table of contents, and all of these are hyperlinks, so you can click on it and it'll take you straight down to that section on the page. You don't have to scroll all the way to the bottom. You also get these wonderful little tables of known record dates for the county specifically. Now, many counties started recording vital records before the state mandated that they do so. South Dakota, for instance, records births for the first time at the state level in 1905. In this case, Clay County also waited until 1905, but their marriage records start in 1880. South Dakota state marriage records don't start till 1905. So if you're a person who was born in Clay County before 1905, not going to find a civil record. But if they were married in 1890, go check it out, right? So this can save you some time. Just going to check these out. They've done a lot of work for you, and it's a fabulous resource. Where else? Well, of course, we've got the big online companies. Ancestry, Find My Past, My Heritage, the big subscription ones. Family Search is free. Huge number of records, adding to it all the time. Lots of good stuff there. But there's also the state archives. All 50 US states have an archive, and they are all starting to digitize select portions of their holdings for those of us who don't live nearby to get into. And I guarantee you, I rarely guarantee anything in genealogy, but I do guarantee you this. Each one of those 50 states, no matter how much they've got on their website, there's more in the back room they haven't gotten to yet. So check the catalog, browse the finding aids. If you can't find what you're looking for, email them. They will be happy to help you figure out if they have what you need, and if so, how to access the records. A lot of records are still living at the local county courthouse. Okay, so you can contact them, and generally speaking, they'll help you with your search. They may charge you a small fee for copies or their time, but do keep in mind that they are generally not, most of them don't have an archivist on staff. So it's the folks who are doing the regular business of the court helping you with your 1886 probate packet. And for some reason, they putting the guy who has a DUI in jail as a higher priority than getting us our old records. I know. Just, follow up occasionally, but just be patient with them. Many universities across the nation have special collection holdings, things that have been donated to them by private individuals or that have been cultivated by staff or students. Archive Grid is a great place to find collections that might be of interest to us in some of these archives, these university collections. A tip for searching in an archival collection, look for keywords. So occupations, places, religions, ethnicities, Chinese immigration, not your person's name. If you're looking for the Methodist Church records, you want to put in, Methodist Church, Ripley County, Indiana, not baptism of John Smith. Okay, so big broad searches, and then look within the results you get. And if you're intrigued by those 11,000 newspapers in 1880, visit chroniclingamerica.gov. It's a free website hosted by the Library of Congress, and there's two portions of the website. Half of the first half that you get to when you first go there is the digitized newspaper collection, which is all free and it's early records. But there's also a newspaper directory button in the upper right-hand corner of the website. And that will help you figure out if there was a newspaper in the specific place and time your ancestor lived. And if so, there's some, finding aids to figure out where those newspapers live now. The loss of the 1890 census is tough. We'd love to have it back. I want it back. But that's not going to happen. I'm sorry. So we're going to get creative, and we're going to search for our families in these alternate record collections and many others besides. And in the end, we'll learn a lot more about our family in this time period than we ever would have if we had simply been able to find them in 1890, click that, save it to our tree, save it to our software, and move on from there. So I hope you've gotten some new ideas for, finding your family without the 1890 census. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Elaine doesn't have a question, but she says, I'm going to email you as my question is too long.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, and that's, if somebody does have a question that they've either come across as they're working or is too long, my email's on the handout, and as well as the screen on front. So definitely feel free to reach out and we'll see what we can do for you. Probably a few people are going, I need to watch that again. I give you a lot, but I know I go fast. Somebody heard my Michigan 1885 census. Yes, go have fun. Love Michigan. Some neat records. And those, the 1885 both Michigan censuses, they're in that kind of that same format as the 1890 veteran schedule. So, the first half of the line is up at the top of the page and then it carries down below. So just kind of something to be aware of as you're looking at it.
Judith Cookson has a comment in the Q&A. She says, my family seemed to cross over to Michigan more than once from Ontario.
Very common. Yes, all of those states that border with Canada, you get a lot of back and forth. Depending on the time period, you may find them in the U.S. border crossing collection, which is available at least parts of it. I don't think the entire collection across all of the National Archives has been digitized, because I think those are regionally held records, but there's a whole bunch of border crossing records at Ancestry that you might want to check out. They're a little bit later, but they're fun records.
Okay, if we don't have any more questions, we can go ahead and close.
All right. Well, everyone, happy researching. Good luck.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is on April 6th with Byron Holdeman. He will be giving a presentation entitled The Library of Congress, A Treasure for Genealogy. A recording of this webinar will be made available next week. You can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.